They're two happy women bringing you inspiring stories, politics, pop culture, and lifestyle hacks, all with an eye to making our communities and our country a better place to live. It's the Happy Women Podcast with your hosts, Jen Horn and Katie Gorka.
Thanks for joining us and welcome to another episode of the Happy Women Podcast. I'm Jennifer Horn.
And I'm Katie Gorka.
And I cannot wait to introduce you to our guest this week because I'm a huge fangirl of these warriors who go out there and fight the good fight for conservatives. And Katie, this is, I know, one of your great friends. Mercedes Schlapp is with us today. You know her as The Force with her husband Matt behind CPAC, and she's all over cable news. Of course, you can find her on Newsmax, former White House strategic senior advisor. You can follow her on X at Mercedes Schlapp. And Mercedes, welcome to Happy Women. Thanks for being with us.
What a joy. I don't think I can use the word joy because that's Kamala Harris's word. But I love being the happy woman. I'm totally there with you. We definitely need a lot of more happy women to be the happy warriors to basically be part of this critical fight that we're living in right now.
Absolutely. And I think Katie and I sometimes say, based on the last couple of weeks in the coronation of Kamala Harris, we say it's the semi-happy women podcast. No, we always got to find the joy. And for sure,
yes.
That's where you come in. And I think we have to start with your story because you really do have an amazing story. And tell us about your dad, your background, how you kind of got to where you are today.
Yes. So my dad was born and raised in Cuba. It's where he meets my mom. And basically in his late 20s, early 30s, Cuba was facing obviously the Cuban Revolution. Fidel Castro basically coming in, saying that it will be a joyful time in Cuba. Doesn't that sound familiar? Yeah. And that, hand over your guns because you don't need them anymore. Hand over your businesses because the Cuban government knows best. And so my father just started watching this happen. He was a self-made, successful businessman. And they came in, literally the military came in and said, hand over your keys. You're no longer in charge of your companies. And we're going to put you in this position because you are there to serve the Castro regime, basically. So my father really could not believe that had just happened in his life. And he then really, he thought about what was he going to do. So part of it was, does he basically, stand in a corner, just probably let things happen, or does he fight? And so he ended up joining a counter-revolutionary group, these very brave men who were focused on taking down the Castro regime. And sadly, there was a mole in the group and he gets arrested along with his friends. They do execute several of his friends and he survives. And so he's thrown into jail for, over 7 years. Many times he was in solitary confinement for months at a time. There was a lot of torture that happened in those jails. And so he ends up, after he is released, coming to the United States and really doesn't talk about it for a very long time, builds his business here in America. He was a carpenter and then an electrician and then eventually becomes an accountant. And raises our family, typical middle-class Cuban family in Miami. And he's not really mentioning too much. But then you start hearing these stories at the kitchen table. And then I felt very much called to go into public service. One of the reasons being that when he was in jail, we're Catholic, he makes a promise to Our Lady of Mercy, and who is the patroness of political prisoners in the Catholic faith. And he says, if I get out, safely and reunited with my wife, I'll name my first daughter Mercedes. And so that is how I come basically into being after he's released from prison. And so I always felt very much kind of, I don't know if it's chosen, or God saying, look, you're the one that's going to have to carry this torch of freedom for this country. And my father loves America. He's still alive, loves America. And he always told me as a little girl, your freedoms are fragile. This republic is fragile. You can lose it in an instant. And you've seen this in countries like Cuba and Venezuela. I just can't believe that right now we are watching slowly how our country is really falling apart and how our freedoms are in danger. So this has been, my calling, I believe, to serve this country and be a public servant. And now, obviously, a very loud spokesperson and warrior in this call to fight against socialism and communism, not only here in America, but actually even across the globe. I mean, my husband and I just came back from CPAC Mexico. And I got to tell you, there is such a longing from these countries. I mean, there was over 15 representatives from a variety of countries there saying, please bring CPAC to our country. We have to organize the conservative fight, and we got to be there to make sure that we can rebuild so many of their countries that they have lost to communism.
This is such an incredible story. I've never heard it in such detail, but I'm so moved by it. And partly because it's so similar to my father-in-law, Sebastian's father. He, at the age of 20, very similar. The communists started to take power. He was put in prison. He was in solitary confinement. He was tortured. And he, too, ended up getting betrayed by a mole. And they were going to kill him, but he got out of the country and escaped. So it's a very powerful story. And I've been saying for a long time, I mean, honestly, some of our fiercest defenders are those who have come from countries where they know better. They know how fragile freedom is. You know, one of the things that it also makes me think of, let me ask you this, what year did your father get to this country?
So he arrived 1970, I would say 1970, 70 or 71.
Okay,
basically.
So quite a bit later. One of the things that really shocked me as I was doing research for my book on Next Gen Marxism, I did not know this, the fact that Harvard University welcomed Fidel Castro to come speak to their students in 1959, just months after the revolution. And you'll wonder why our universities are where they are today.
Well, and just think about that. Kennedy obviously abandons the Cubans during the Bay of Pigs, a resistance movement, which could have been a significant change in that country. And then it was Ronald Reagan who really spoke clearly to the Cuban people and those that had left Cuba and basically said, you know, he understood this fight between good and evil and this fight between the U.S. and communism. And it's why you saw so many Cubans flood, basically join the Republican Party because of the Republican Party's really like loud voice and on supporting freedom in these communist countries.
So I'd love to know a little bit more about CPAC. So I've been multiple times, but I honestly don't know that much about the background. And I don't know how you and Matt got involved with it because it's older than you guys, right?
Much older.
Okay, that's what I thought. So you guys kind of came in later.
Right.
Tell us a little bit about the background to CPAC and what you all are doing with it today.
So CPAC, and it comes from the American Conservative Union, obviously founded by William F. Buckley, a very, I would say, colorful, eccentric, smart, conservative intellect of our time. You know, it was back in the 1960s that he launches American Conservative Union along with then National Review, the publication, which I think has pretty much lost its way in terms of not supporting Trump, but that's a whole different story. But they launch, and then there is where Barry Goldwater gets involved, and then they start having basically just these small conferences in Washington, D.C., bringing conservatives, like-minded people together, addressing these issues on how they can solve these problems and push conservatism in America. Ronald Reagan has spoke there 13 times, and now President Trump broke that record. He's spoken there 14 times. And it really is a gathering, the largest gathering of conservatives, not only nationally, but then all of a sudden, through the grace of God, internationally, right? Now we have actually the summit, the CPAC International Summit, where we bring in representatives from the different continents, where we share ideas. What's working in Argentina, what's working in Japan, what's working in Brazil or Australia. And literally you learn about the fights, how these communists function. We have to understand that the communists have been very effective, especially in Latin America, in organizing. They have the Foro of Sao Paulo. Now they have another organization that they've pretty much branched off into, and they get organized. And it is propaganda driven. It is oppression driven. It is censorship driven. It is take down the parties so that you only have one party. I'll give you an example. In Mexico City, which we just did CPAC Mexico, I quickly learned that the Morena party, which is the leftist party, talk about propaganda. There was one ad after another saying how wonderful and great and what they're doing to uplift the Mexicans. And then later you find out that they're paying voters about 1,000 pesos if they go vote for their party. And then the conservatives, really, their whole party system has fallen apart, the center-right system, because they've all gotten corrupt, accepted what would be the center-right party has gone corrupt, accepted the woke agenda. And it's a big payoff everywhere from big corporations. So they've kind of fallen apart to the point that conservatives have to join these other kind of parties that are still left. They're left parties. And then they run with them because it's the only way to make kind of, to get into the political process. And so this idea of one party systems, this idea of reforming the judiciary. So now, for example, the president of Mexico, what is she trying to do? She's trying to reform the judiciary system so that it favors her and it gives her more authority and power. And so we've seen this in countries like Venezuela. We now see this, what's happening in Mexico. Obviously, it's coming to a country near you, i.e.
like it's
America.
Here in
yeah, exactly.
Describing the government in California. And
exactly.
With some hints of Biden and Harris in there, too, taking down their political opponents.
Right.
Mercedes, what are you seeing since we're talking about CPAC going international? And I think that's so fantastic. Congratulations to you guys. It's a testament to your hard work. What kind of trends are you seeing? Because there does feel like there is waves of change coming across the globe. Is there anything that you could correlate to maybe what we're seeing here? Again, hopefully with the re-election of President Trump, are you seeing any similarities happening across the globe?
I do have to say at CPAC Mexico, I love it. You had so many Mexicans wearing Make America Great Again hats. They're wearing MAGA hats. Why? Because they know that if the U.S. is in a strong position, that means that it will benefit Latin America. When there is prosperity in America, it literally, seeps into their region. It's a strong Western hemisphere that they want to see. What they have witnessed, for example, in Latin America is more and more countries have turned, red in the sense of not like the red state, but like the communist state, right? You're losing countries like in Nicaragua, where you have an authoritarian government. In Guatemala, for example. I mean, the list goes on and on. With that being said, there are little glimpses of hope, that being President Javier Milei in Argentina. He is incredible. He's a powerhouse. Anywhere he goes, he delivers this strong message of understanding why socialism is basically a cancer to society. In Western Europe, you see Giorgia Meloni, the Prime Minister of Italy, who is surviving, thank God. Normally, the prime ministers of Italy don't last longer than a year. And so, they are all saying the same thing. You have Viktor Orban in Hungary, as you know, Katie, and they've gone through communism. They are trying to make sure that they don't let the leftists come in. And so you're starting to see these glimpses of hopes in different countries. With that being said, there's not enough of us. And they're all looking to America to see if Donald Trump can get elected, because they know that he's part of this bigger puzzle to try to push back on communism and in essence give hope to these other countries.
So here in the United States, the whole border crisis is painted by the left as sort of an act of national sympathy, right? We're sympathetic toward these people who are leaving, terrible political situations, terrible economic situations. And it's the sympathetic thing to do to let them in the country. But we all know that actually what it's really doing is it's incentivizing child trafficking.
Yes.
And it is even worse than that, it is enriching the cartels.
Yes.
I'm just curious. I mean, that has got to be a major factor in the current political situation in Mexico. Did this come up as a topic during CPAC Mexico?
Very much so. So CPAC gets very involved in this issue of anti-human trafficking. It's been a year since we launched our Center for Combating Human Trafficking, have done actually a significant amount of work at the state legislature level and at the federal level And really, truly, we were inspired by it because of what we saw in Mexico. When you have over 300,000 children that are not accounted for in America because the federal government has no idea where they are, and several of these children are being basically sent to one address for one sponsor, and then there's no follow-up to see what has happened to that child. I mean, that itself is a tragedy. You hear about these rape trees in places like Arizona where, you know, a third of the young women are being sexually assaulted by these human traffickers, by these drug cartels. I mean, it is absolutely disgusting. And I always say, this is not a political issue. I don't freaking care if you're a Democrat or Republican. I don't even care if you're a communist. Like, this is a humanity issue. This is an issue of having to save these children. And so we really had this incredible opportunity to go visit, they call it Girls Town. It's actually a Catholic run, I would say, orphanage, a place where between the ages of 12 and about 16, 17 years old, these incredible sisters, these nuns, go into the poorest places in Mexico, where in a lot of the cases, these girls have been abused, or they could have definitely been victims of sex trafficking, living in the poorest of conditions. And they bring them to this incredible campus. It's over 3,000 girls who we visited when we were there just this week. I can't even tell you how it's amazing. And it's a model that works, where these girls are not only educated, they learn English, they learn everything from math, science, sports, dance, you name it, like gardening, how to make bread, how to sew. And more importantly, it is Christ-centric and to help them heal in the wounds that they've had. And every time I go there, I'm so inspired because you understand what the fight's about. And it really is about these incredible children that are able to have a second chance. Many of them go off to college. Many of them, the companies come and hire them because they're so incredibly disciplined and kind and smart. And you just can't help but say, goodness, we need to have this everywhere across the globe. But I have to tell you, that's why when you're looking at the border, you want to get it to the point that there's prevention, that we don't end up in a situation where these girls have these traumas and then it's too late, or it takes a very long time for them to get the resources they need to help heal after these sex trafficking incidents.
It's incredible to hear those stories. And I see them. I live in California, so we hear about the women and the children who are so vulnerable. And I think you're hitting the nail right on the head when it comes to immigration. This is it's a human issue. It isn't a political issue. This is about humanity, about incentivizing this bad behavior and abuse of women and children. Just kind of switching gears a bit, Mercedes, being in California, I host a morning show in Los Angeles. I speak a lot around the state, and I get calls all the time. How do we save California? How do we get some sanity back? And my answer is always growing our base and welcoming in Latino voters. Latino voters, I believe, will save California. I think they're moving in the direction also of saving this country. What's your feeling now about widening our conservative tent, welcoming, actively looking for Latino voters to join our movement? And I really believe that Trump's going to win Latino voters this time around. The only polling that they're showing now is stuff that's beneficial to Kamala. But you know what they haven't shown is the polling on Latino voters, because he's still winning with them. So what do you think? What's your sense of where Latino voters will go this year and how we can bring more into the conservative sphere?
So my passion is that Center for Combating Human Trafficking, which I think is so critical. I wouldn't say my second, I would basically say they're tied, is the CPAC Unidos project that we've launched. My whole goal is literally to hone in on Hispanic outreach. Katie and I had this great meeting just a couple of weeks ago where we're going to work really hard in Virginia to connect with these voters because we believe that, they might not feel comfortable being Republican necessarily, right? Or being Democrat, but there's something I think in this middle ground of shared values of conservatism, because the Hispanics are naturally conservative. They go to church. They are raising their families. They don't want their kids to have to deal with this gender ideology stuff. They are feeling the huge financial stress that so many American families are feeling. And quite frankly, they hate this chaos at the border, and they don't want crime in their communities. They they fit with us. This is where, and sadly, like Democrats have just done a better job for a long time of just being in these communities, just physically being there and trying to get their votes. And so we're launching an effort, not only here in Virginia, but in states like Arizona and in Nevada, now in these battleground states, to really hone in on these Hispanic voters, including New Mexico, hone in on these Hispanic voters saying, I know you might not want to be a Republican necessarily or a Democrat, but when you look at it, it is truly the Republican Party that stands for your values and the ones who are going to fight for you. Now, I will tell you, I am concerned about where we are with the Hispanic outreach here because Harris has reset the game. And so with Biden, he surely could not connect with the Hispanic voters. But I think for Harris, they have made it one of their focuses to basically connect with the Hispanic voters and spend a lot of money doing outreach in these Latino communities, many of them that are located in these cities, in these battleground states. So I don't see much coming out of the Trump campaign, which we need to see a lot more coming out from there. And I'm hoping that in the few, days that are left, really, that we can make some inroads there. I know here at CPAC, we're going to focus in on our message of America versus socialism. Part of CPAC Unidos, which is launching with Bienvenidos, is honing in on these states, and we're launching our project Latinos Against Socialism. So we're telling the stories of these people who have lived in Venezuela, have lived in Nicaragua, have lived in El Salvador. They understand the dangers of communism, what this all means, and then they can say, look, Kamala is just pretty much too far left and a shadow communist, for crying out loud.
All right. So I want to talk about Trump and women. And the reason I want to talk about this is because I still keep hearing about those people that are theoretically conservative, but will not support Trump. And I am convinced it's because they have fallen prey to the left-wing narrative that has, just from the beginning tried to paint him in a bad light. And okay, to be fair, he's not the world's most upright, but I'm sorry. I think he's 10 times better than Bill Clinton or even JFK, right? They behaved atrociously. Hardly anybody talks about that. But I want to ask you, because you, as a woman, you worked in the White House. You got to work directly with President Trump. I'm just really curious from your perspective, how did he treat the women who worked for him?
So we joke around. I think it was Kelly.
Volatility and uncertainty are everywhere we turn. Many Americans have grown increasingly tired of the reckless fiscal spending, mounting national debt, and the looming threat to the dollar. With never-ending political and global conflicts, Americans are looking for a way out of the fragile paper system and craving a trustworthy asset to help protect their savings. That's why they turn to gold. Specifically, a gold IRA from Augusta Precious Metals. If you have over $100,000 in a retirement account, it's time you learned about the potential benefits of a gold IRA from Augusta Precious Metals. Augusta Precious Metals is a world-class organization that prides itself on top-notch service. Ready to learn more? Get your free guide on gold IRAs today by calling 855-222-6994. Volatility is everywhere. Now is the time to take control of your retirement to secure a brighter financial future with Augusta Precious Metals. Call them at 855-222-6994 today.
And Sarah Huckabee Sanders, Ivanka, myself, and I think it was like Brooke Rollins, and we counted that we had 19 children between all of us. Okay. So when we all worked at the White House, which were insane hours. And I thank the Lord for my family who was so patient during that time that I got to serve in the White House. But I will tell you, the President Trump, first of all, he was the best boss I've ever had. And secondly, he would listen to the women in the room. He values the opinion of the women, and in every policy, from domestic policy to foreign policy. And so I greatly appreciate that. Look, I think we have to understand the Democrats are going to push this narrative that Kamala Harris will become the first woman president if she doesn't become the first woman president before November, because God only knows Joe Biden is still on vacation. He might decide, okay, you know what, this vacation thing is really good. Kamala, just step right in. And then, of course, it becomes easier for an incumbent to win. So that's, I think, one possibility that can happen there. Secondly, I think for President Trump, the demonization is constant from the left of the women and how, you know, it's all about the abortion issue and like all these fear tactics that they keep pushing through. And so I think for women, you know, we have to be those voices out there to say, look, you might not like Trump's tweets. You might not like everything he does, but there is no question your life was better under Donald Trump. You and your family could afford to pay for things, okay? Like you and your family were safer. The border was under control. Let's be real. I mean, I just saw, for example, I just read this New York Post story on how the women in Afghanistan pretty much are not allowed to speak publicly anymore. They're done. So the Taliban have shut them down. This is all following the most disastrous foreign policy execution ever by Kamala Harris, which she herself admits that she was one of the last people in the room to make that decision. So I'm sorry, she's not for women if literally you're seeing these women once again being horribly opposed and censored by the Taliban, which we know it's very abusive. So I think for us, it's just we kind of have to be talking to these women to say, I get it, you don't like them, but the reality is, you know, we need a strong economy. We need life to be more affordable. And quite frankly, the world is really in chaos and we need some sort of stability in the world, which means no more wars, figure out how we end the wars, figure out how we get a stability once again in this country and take it from there. And then also deal with the potential of a terrorist attack here in the United States because of that freaking open border. I mean, let's be real.
Yeah, we need a leader. You don't have to like him. We need a leader.
We do.
I mean, you know, Katie and I always laugh because I love Trump being Trump. Like, it doesn't bother me in the least. Like, I find it amusing. So I just don't understand women that would sign up and say, well, if we leave, I mean, literally the threat to your children being drafted, maybe if the global conflicts continue under this poor leadership, that alone should be the reason, not to mention being able to afford your groceries and feel like you can walk outside and let your kids play in the yard. I mean, there's so many reasons to bring in women voters, and it doesn't have to be about the feelings, but that's what Democrats are banking on. They want to be the joyful candidate, as we saw during the convention. Mercedes, what do you think of the RFK endorsement and the Tulsi Gabbard endorsement? Looking forward, what would you like the next 70 days to look like for the Trump campaign?
Sure. So Tulsi was with us in CPAC Mexico, was just so well received. And she's so fantastic. And I'm going to tell you a story which I haven't told many people. So Tulsi and I were in a green room one time. This was probably after the 2016 election, I would say. So it was probably before she decides to break away from the Democrat Party, getting close, but not there. And I just got along with, I loved her. I was like, this lady is just so neat. And I remember telling her, and I actually told her this weekend when I saw her, I was like, Tulsi, do you remember when I told you, Tulsi, you just need to meet President Trump? I go, you're going to love him. Like, you could totally be his Secretary of Defense. I can completely see this. So I tell her the story. And I actually reminded her this week. She goes, oh, Mercy, I remember when you told me that. I said, yes. And look at what happened. So, you know, I find her to be a voice of reason in the foreign policy light, where we don't need to be in these endless wars. The Democrat Party has left so many Democrats behind. They literally haven't embraced a far left agenda, a radical agenda that is anti-family, anti-children, and pretty much anti-American, in my opinion. And then for Robert F. Kennedy Jr., so we decided, it was a bit of a controversial move. We had a summit out in Nevada, and we invited RFK Jr. to speak, and all of our basically big donors were there, and they were complaining. They were like, we don't want to hear from this guy. Why do we have to hear from this guy? I was like, give him a chance. Mm-hmm. Give him a chance. We don't agree with his climate policy issue. I don't agree with his abortion policy, but give him a chance. Well, he spoke to that group, and he had changed minds. They were like, we love this guy. You know, he's a fighter of the deep state. He's thinks that the government's involvement in all the vaccine issue is way too much. He's all about talking about how the food industry has become corrupt and how the government's involved in this. So you're having a lot of unnecessary chemicals being put into our foods that then we're injecting into our children and into our families. This is a big issue that the FDA obviously is very much involved in. So I find him to be I think he brings such energy. And I think you're starting to see many of his voters in key critical states coming towards the Republican side. So I do think his endorsement is huge for President Trump.
What I find is interesting about him as well is I 100% disagree with some of his positions, but I find him very authentic. I mean, I feel like he is what he says he is, and it makes me trust him. So I don't have an issue with disagreeing with somebody. I have an issue with somebody who puts on a veneer where they're going to say one thing today when they said something else yesterday, which is absolutely Kamala Harris and Tim Walz. And I think that, and I also truly think this is a big part of Trump's appeal for many people as well. He is 100% authentic. Yeah, he is. And I think like what the media has done is they've just demonized him. They've made him into this most horrific human being. And it was interesting because at the RNC, I think we all who have known Trump and have met Trump, know that there was a softness to him. After the assassination attempt, there was this moment of reflection you could tell during that whole convention of saying, God has put me here for a reason. I'm so grateful that I survived the assassination attempt, and I know that I've been chosen to serve. And so I think that that's so different from the Kamala Harris fakeness and cackle and joy talk that you're like, gag me. You're like, please, I can't take it anymore. When you have the Obamas talking about, war and depression while they themselves, are worth billions of dollars, and they're more elite than any of us combined. So it's just I find them to be so fake, and I just think that this idea like Beyonce was going to show up so more people watched because they wanted to hear Beyonce, and then all of a sudden it was just not going to happen, just shows the superficiality of the Democrat Party and how they themselves have made this decision to sell their product. So Karl Marx, and you know this, Katie, he uses a line that says, surround yourself with happy people. And that's what it was at the DNC. It was like, let's just be happy. And it's like, how can we be happy when we have girls like cutting off their breasts because they think they're boys? How can we be happy when Kamala's saying price controls, they're going to work? No, they're not. They're going to cause rations. They're going to cause supply shortages. I mean, it's going to be very problematic. How are we going to be happy if you can't pay for your bills? You can't buy a home. It is such a fakeness that I pray to God the American people absolutely see through this.
If they look at her record is schizophrenic. She, would bail people out of jail, yet she was still throwing black men in prison for holding an ounce of marijuana in California. She's all over the place. And if people actually study who she is, then they realize that she is a transactional actor who can be controlled by a Democrat Party that wants to stay in control of the country. It's interesting to see. What the DNC told me, Mercedes, is it showed me the bench, right? I mean, this is what's great about these conventions is you get to hear from different people. While the Republicans focused on real people's stories, the Democrats focused a lot on AOC, on Jasmine Crockett, on kind of their up-and-comers in their party. At CPAC, you get to see some incredible rising stars in our movement. And so my question for you is kind of a personal one. Obviously, we know the type of appeal that President Trump has, especially at CPAC and in conservative circles. But who would you say catch fire the most at your conferences and at your conventions? Some of the up-and-coming conservative stars we should keep an eye on.
Goodness gracious. Well, Sebastian Gorka is one of them.
Absolutely.
He's a frequent speaker.
Also.
He's one of the favorites. Yes, I know. I'm almost thinking we should have Katie interview Sebastian. Like now I'm starting to have this, like put it all together type of thing. Oh gosh, there's so many of them. I mean, I hate to say it, but I'm not going to I feel like I'm going to forget somebody. But, obviously Trump always at CPAC, I find is where he kind of lets his hair down. I'm sure that's kind of a funny way to say it, but he lets his hair down because he talks for 2.5 hours. He's with his family. He's with his people. He feels so comfortable. He loves going to CPAC. It's his place where he just, even before he ran for president, it's where it was his testing ground. So he feels very at home there. So Trump obviously gets an enormous applause and just love from the audience. I always think like Mark Levin is really beloved there too, because we have Julie, his wife, and Mark together, and it's just a great combination, and then, obviously we've had, JD Vance, Ted Cruz. I mean, the list goes on and on of these incredible speakers that have come. What's been fascinating lately for us is that we have the international speakers coming. So President Milei from Argentina spoke. It was very powerful. And then we had President Nayib Bukele from El Salvador, who's like cleaned up his country from it being a crime-infested country to now a safe country and moving towards economic prosperity in El Salvador. Brilliant speaker that we've had. We had obviously Meloni speak as well from Italy. So what you're finding is that, yes, you have these incredible American speakers. And then on top of that, you have these international speakers. Viktor Orban spoke at CPAC as well. And so I think that it helps the Americans understand, like, we're not alone in this fight. This fight is an international fight, and that things that they might be doing in one country can help us prepare for what's happening here in America. So we had President Jair Bolsonaro speak as well, the former president from Brazil. And, you know, it just helps you to understand the direction of where these crazy left are going. And I'm sure, look, I'm sure I'm missing so much. If I go down the list, I'm going to be like, oh, that speaker or the other speaker, you know, because I just do think we try to be creative in not just saying, oh, let's just have a bunch of congressmen come speak. In fact, we don't want to do it that way. We want to be very unique and have people who are experts in these policy areas. We want them to present the solutions. It's not just a rah-rah speech. You know, we carefully figure out which panels make sense on a variety of topics. And then obviously, so that the audience know, okay, these are the solutions that we got to work on in their states or their cities or their communities. What I love about CPAC is then so many of the, you know, we've had so many people come back and say, I ran for school board and won. I ran for Congress and won. I ran for city commission, you know, and won, you know. So I think that's also, you know, a great way for people to then say, okay, I'm going to take what I learned here and then I'm going to go run for office. Or I'm going to get involved as a poll watcher or get involved in the election integrity piece. And so I think that's the best part is like actually the people themselves, because they are inspired, but they're inspiring to go out there and then take it and make action from what they've learned at CPAC.
I do think CPAC is the best pep rally in the conservative movement. And it's so, look, I mean, so many of us spend so much of our time fighting this fight. And every now and then you just need that injection of uplift and happiness and encouragement. And that's why I love going to CPAC. So yes, I will say that. As we wrap up, I'm not going to ask you, are you optimistic about the future? Because I know you are. You are so clearly a happy warrior. But I wonder if you could say, why are you optimistic about the future of America in spite of all the terrible things we see going on? I'm sure, Katie, you do the same thing with Sebastian. I do like a temperature check with Matt where I'm like, are we going to win or are we going to lose? Like, that's always my question. And so Matt always says, he goes, it's going to take a miracle to win. And I do believe that. And so I think, for me, obviously our faith is very, very important in our family. It is foundational. It is what keeps us focused every day of like, we put on the armor of God, Ephesians 6:11. I believe that every single day because we could not do our jobs. None of us here, our happy women here, could do our jobs without it. And the reality is that, I had the opportunity this weekend to meet with the Monsignor who takes care of the Basilica of Our Lady of Guadalupe. And I love Our Lady of Guadalupe. It was the feast day when Matt and I got engaged. And, it's funny because I always have these conversations with evangelical Christians and Methodists, and they're like, oh, Our Lady, the Virgin Mother. I'm like, we get it. Look, we all love Jesus Christ. We're all there. Don't worry. Stick together because we all need to be together and vote Republican. But I do. I was meeting with the Monsignor and I asked him, I said, what should we pray for? And he goes, pray for peace. Pray for peace in the world. He goes, things are so delicate right now. It could topple over. And then I secretly learned that he loves Donald Trump. So, of course, in my mind, he goes, we have to pray for America. Because we are in this moment of time that, with the right warriors in place in all these different battleground states, with the right, I think, strategy in place, we definitely can win. But it is going to take, it's going to be one of those moments where it's like, does God have mercy on us and our country? Does God want America to really write that next chapter of being the strong country that represents these incredible values or not? And really, the people are going to have to decide. And I just have to believe that there's more good
than evil in this country, and that they understand what's at stake. And I think we saw this with President Trump. He's not, Matt always says he's not a churched man. He doesn't go to church all the time. I don't think he's reading the Bible too much, but I will tell you, after that assassination attempt, there was a change where he himself understood that God was on his side. And he said it the other day when he was visiting the border. He said, I will be put in danger, if I have to, but I know that I have a job to do. And he's brave, and he's been a lion throughout this. And I think it's an inspiration for all of us to continue this fight, to not give up, and then to stay focused on really convincing people, guys, we're going to lose America. So I know, so there's one option here. There's only one option, and that's electing Donald Trump.
He is in my prayers. I know he is in the Gorka's prayers. We've actually prayed together just recently when we were on a cruise to Alaska. So we are praying for this country. And I think it's up to each one of us also to use resources like you give people, Mercedes, and you put out there, Katie, and become emboldened and talk to people. We all have the power to change one mind at least. So
yes.
I think it's a great place to end this interview, but you are welcome back anytime. I think
this was great. Let's do it again.
You've got to be a co-host with us, I think, is what
I would love it.
Mercedes Schlapp is here. Give her a follow at Mercedes Schlapp. And thank you again so much for what you do. And thank you all for joining us. Don't forget to get Katie's book. It's out right now. It's called Next Gen Marxism. You can check out her website, katiegorka.org. And of course, give her a follow on Facebook. Just search for Catherine Gorka. You can find me there too, Instagram and Facebook at Jennifer Horn Radio, and on Truth and X at Jennifer Horn. Please share Happy Women with your friends. Give us those 5-star reviews. We really do appreciate them. And thanks for joining us. It's another episode of the Happy Women Podcast.